The bruise on Sarah Mitchell's cheekbone had faded to a sickly yellow by the time she finally understood that love was not supposed to leave marks you had to hide beneath powder and shame. She stood in front of the cracked mirror in her bedroom at the Mitchell Ranch house outside Abilene, Kansas, in the spring of 1882, watching her own reflection as if it belonged to a stranger. The woman staring back at her had turned 21 3 months ago, but her eyes looked decades older. Behind her, she could hear Thomas Mitchell moving through the house with that particular heaviness that meant he had been drinking since noon, and her stomach clenched with a familiar dread that she had learned to mistake for devotion. Thomas was the son of John Mitchell, who owned the second-largest cattle operation in Dickinson County. Sarah's father had worked Mitchell land for 15 years before a spooked horse kicked him in the chest and stopped his heart 2 summers past. Thomas had come to the funeral in his fine black suit, had held Sarah's hand during the service, had promised her father's memory that he would take care of her. 6 months later, they were engaged. Everyone in Abilene said how fortunate she was, how generous Thomas was to marry a woman with no prospects and no dowry. Sarah had believed them. She had believed Thomas when he said he loved her. She had believed him right up until the first time his hand connected with her face. And even then, she had believed him when he said it was her fault, that she had pushed him too far, that love sometimes required correction. The door to her room swung open without warning. Thomas filled the doorframe, his blonde hair disheveled, his blue eyes cold despite the flush of whiskey in his cheeks. He was handsome in the way that prairie boys who grew up with everything often were, with strong features and broad shoulders, but Sarah had learned to see past the surface to the cruelty underneath. "My father wants to see you," Thomas said. His words were only slightly slurred. "He is asking why supper is not ready." Sarah glanced at the small clock on her dresser. It was barely 4 in the afternoon. "I was planning to start cooking at 5 like always," she said carefully, keeping her voice level and her eyes downcast. She had learned that looking at Thomas directly when he was drinking could be taken as defiance. "Well, he is hungry now," Thomas snapped. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow where the bruises never showed. "When my father asks for something, you do not make him wait. I thought you understood that by now." "I understand," Sarah said quickly. "I will go start supper right now," but Thomas did not release her arm. Instead, he pulled her closer and she could smell the whiskey on his breath mixed with tobacco. "You have been difficult lately," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous softness that always preceded the worst moments. "Questioning me, making me repeat myself." "I do it because I love you, Sarah. You know that, right? Everything I do is to make you better, to make you the kind of wife a Mitchell deserves." "I know," Sarah whispered, because that was what he needed to hear. He studied her face for a long moment, then released her arm with a little shove that sent her stumbling back against the dresser. "Get downstairs, and do not burn the meat like you did last week." After he left, Sarah stood motionless for several seconds, waiting for her hands to stop shaking. Then she smoothed her dress, checked her hair, and went downstairs to prepare a meal for men who treated her like property they had a right to damage. That evening, as Sarah served pot roast and potatoes to Thomas and his father, John Mitchell barely looked at her. He was a large man in his 60s, with a gray beard and the same cold eyes his son had inherited. He had never been unkind to Sarah exactly, but he had never been kind either. She was simply there, a fixture in his house, useful for cooking and cleaning and eventually for producing grandchildren who would carry on the Mitchell name. "The herd we bought from Peterson is not adjusting well," John said to Thomas, cutting into his meat with sharp, efficient movements. "Lost 2 head this week. I am thinking we need to move them to the south pasture." "Yes, sir," Thomas agreed. "I will handle it tomorrow." Sarah moved quietly around the table, refilling water glasses, removing empty plates, making herself invisible. This was safest. When they did not notice her, they could not find fault with her. But as she reached for John's plate, her sleeve rode up just enough to reveal the finger-shaped bruises on her arm. John's eyes flicked to them briefly, then away. He said nothing. He had seen marks on her before and had never commented. Whatever his son did to his future wife was not his concern, as long as she still performed her duties. After dinner, Sarah washed dishes in the kitchen while Thomas and his father smoked cigars on the front porch. Through the window, she could hear the low rumble of their voices discussing cattle prices and grazing rights. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, scrubbing plates clean in the basin of heated water, but her mind was elsewhere. She found herself thinking about her mother, who had died when Sarah was 12. Her mother had been a gentle woman, always ready with a smile and a kind word. Sarah wondered what her mother would think if she could see her daughter now, trapped in this house with a man who called his violence love. The thought came unbidden and dangerous. This is not love. Sarah's hands stilled in the dishwater. The thought came again, stronger this time. This is not what love is supposed to feel like. She had been telling herself for months that Thomas's treatment of her was normal, that all couples struggled, that she simply needed to try harder to please him. But standing alone in that kitchen, with her arms aching and her spirit bruised, something inside her shifted. She did not know yet what she would do about it, but for the first time she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. Thomas Mitchell did not love her. He owned her, or thought he did, and ownership was not the same thing as love. The next morning, John Mitchell announced at breakfast that he needed supplies from town and that Sarah should go with Thomas to help carry packages. Sarah's stomach dropped. Being alone with Thomas away from the ranch often meant he felt free to be rougher with her, knowing no one would hear if she cried out. But she nodded and said, "Yes, sir," because refusing was not an option. The ride into Abilene took nearly an hour in the wagon. Thomas drove in silence, the reins loose in his hands, his jaw tight. Sarah sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, watching the prairie roll past. It was a beautiful morning, with the sky endless and blue overhead and wildflowers beginning to dot the grassland. Sarah had always loved spring in Kansas, the way the whole world seemed to wake up and remember how to be alive. She wondered if she would ever feel that way again, awake and alive instead of simply surviving. They were halfway to town when they saw the rider. He was coming from the north, moving at an easy pace on a paint horse that picked its way carefully through the prairie grass. As he got closer, Sarah could see he was tall and lean, wearing a battered hat and dusty trail clothes. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but there was something in the way he sat his horse that suggested confidence without arrogance. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop as the rider approached, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle he kept under the seat. Strangers were not uncommon on the trail to Abilene, but Thomas trusted no one. "Morning," the rider called out as he drew near. He pushed his hat back, revealing a face that was sun-weathered and strong-featured, with dark eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He looked to be in his mid-20s, maybe a few years older than Sarah. "I am looking for the Peterson Ranch. Fellow in Salina said it was somewhere around here." "You passed it about 5 miles back," Thomas said curtly. "Head south at the fork." "Much obliged," the rider said. His eyes moved from Thomas to Sarah, and his smile faded slightly. Sarah realized he was looking at the faint yellow bruise still visible on her cheekbone. She resisted the urge to turn her face away to hide the evidence of her shame. "You looking for work at Peterson's?" Thomas asked, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. "Maybe," the rider said. "Name is Cole Brennan. I have been working ranches up in Nebraska, but I heard there might be opportunities down here." "Peterson is always hiring," Thomas said dismissively. He picked up the reins, ready to move on, but Cole Brennan was still looking at Sarah, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. It was not pity exactly, but recognition, as if he saw not just the bruise but the woman beneath it. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Sir," Sarah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Then Thomas snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward, leaving Cole Brennan behind in a cloud of dust. Sarah twisted in her seat to look back and saw him sitting motionless on his horse, watching them go. Even at a distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze. "Do not," Thomas said sharply. Sarah turned back around. "Do not what? Do not look at other men like that." "I was not." His hand shot out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to face him. The wagon continued rolling, the horses knowing the way without guidance. "I saw how you looked at him," Thomas hissed. "I am not stupid, Sarah. You would do well to remember who you belong to." "I am sorry," Sarah said automatically, fear flooding through her. "I did not mean anything by it. I was just being polite." Thomas released her chin with a shove that snapped her head back. "You are mine," he said. "You would do well to remember that. If I ever catch you looking at another man that way again, I will make sure you regret it. Do you understand?" "Yes," Sarah whispered, blinking back tears. "I understand." They completed the rest of the journey in suffocating silence. By the time they reached Abilene, Sarah's hands were shaking again, and she had to clench them into fists to make them stop. The town was busy that morning, with wagons and horses lining the main street and people moving in and out of the shops. Abilene had grown considerably since the railroad arrived, transforming from a small prairie town into a bustling hub for the cattle trade. Sarah had once found the energy of it exciting. Now it just felt overwhelming. Thomas hitched the wagon in front of the general store and climbed down without offering Sarah a hand. She followed him inside, where Mr. Henderson greeted them with his usual cheerful smile. "Morning, Thomas, Miss Sarah. What can I do for you folks today?" Thomas handed over the list his father had written, and Mr. Henderson began gathering items from the shelves. Sarah wandered toward the back of the store, where bolts of fabric were displayed in neat rows. She ran her fingers over a piece of blue calico, soft as a whisper, and allowed herself to imagine for just a moment what it would be like to make a dress for herself simply because she liked the color, not because Thomas or his father had opinions about what she should wear. "That would look lovely on you." Sarah turned to find Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper's wife, smiling at her. Mrs. Henderson was a plump, kind-faced woman in her 50s who had always been friendly to Sarah. "Oh, I am just looking," Sarah said quickly. "Mrs. Henderson's smile dimmed slightly as she took in Sarah's face. Her eyes lingered on the bruise, and Sarah fought the urge to make excuses for it, but Mrs. Henderson said nothing about it. Instead, she reached out and gently squeezed Sarah's hand. "You take care of yourself, dear," she said quietly. "You hear me?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The simple kindness in Mrs. Henderson's voice made her want to cry, and she could not afford to cry here, not where Thomas might see. They loaded the supplies into the wagon and began the journey back to the ranch. Sarah was grateful that Thomas seemed to have calmed down, his anger from earlier apparently forgotten or at least suppressed. They were nearly home when they saw smoke rising in the distance, dark and thick against the blue sky. "Hell," Thomas muttered, snapping the reins to urge the horses faster. "That is coming from our land." As they got closer, Sarah could see that the smoke was coming from the south pasture, where John Mitchell had been planning to move the new herd. When they crested the hill, they saw the fire itself, flames racing through the dry grass, driven by the prairie wind. And in the midst of it, Sarah could see cattle running in panic, their bellowing audible even at a distance. Thomas drove the wagon recklessly down the hill toward the ranch house, nearly throwing Sarah from her seat with the speed. When they arrived, John Mitchell was already mounted on his horse, along with 2 ranch hands. "Fire started about an hour ago," John shouted over the roar of flames. "Lightning strike, I think. We need every hand to dig a fire break before it reaches the other pastures." "I will help," Thomas said, jumping down from the wagon. "Get the girl inside," John ordered. "She will just be in the way." Sarah climbed down from the wagon and stood helplessly as the men rode off toward the fire. She could feel the heat of it even from here, could smell the acrid scent of burning grass and the terror of the animals. She went inside the house as ordered, but she found she could not simply sit and wait. Instead, she filled every bucket and basin she could find with water from the pump, preparing for the possibility that the men would return burned or injured. She was carrying a heavy bucket across the yard when she saw another rider approaching at a gallop. As he got closer, she recognized the paint horse and the tall figure in the saddle. Cole Brennan. He pulled his horse to a stop near the house, his eyes already on the smoke. "Saw the fire from Peterson's place," he called down to her. "Looks like you could use help." "The men are out digging a fire break," Sarah said, pointing toward the south pasture. "They went that way." Cole nodded and started to turn his horse, then paused. "You are going to be all right here alone?" It was such a simple question, asked with such genuine concern, that Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. "Yes," she managed. "Thank you." He studied her for a moment longer, then touched his hat and rode off toward the fire. Sarah watched him go, this stranger who had stopped to help people he did not know, who had looked at her like she mattered. Then she went back to filling buckets because it was the only useful thing she could think to do. The fire took most of the day to contain. Sarah kept busy preparing food and coffee, knowing the men would be exhausted and hungry when they returned. By the time the sun was beginning to set, she had stew simmering on the stove and cornbread cooling on the counter. She stood on the front porch, watching the smoke slowly dissipate, praying that everyone would return safely. They came back in ones and twos as darkness fell. The ranch hands first, their faces black with soot, their clothes singed and filthy. Then John Mitchell, looking older and more tired than Sarah had ever seen him. And finally, Thomas and Cole Brennan, riding side by side. They had apparently fought the fire together because both men were covered in ash and dirt, their hands wrapped in makeshift bandages. Sarah met them in the yard with water and clean cloths. Thomas dismounted stiffly, wincing as his burned hands touched the reins. "Get me whiskey," he said to Sarah without looking at her, "and draw a bath." "Yes," Sarah said. She turned to Cole, who was also dismounting. "You are hurt too." "Let me, I am fine, ma'am," Cole said, though she could see the pain in the tight lines around his mouth. "Just a few burns, nothing serious." "At least let me clean them," Sarah insisted. "Burns can get infected." John Mitchell had disappeared into the house, already calling for food and drink. Thomas grabbed Sarah's arm as she reached for Cole's hands. "I said get me whiskey," he repeated, his voice sharp. "Thomas, your friend is hurt." "He is not my friend," Thomas interrupted. "He is a hired hand who helped with the fire." "You take care of me first, then you can play nursemaid if you want." Sarah pulled her arm free and went inside to get the whiskey, her face burning with humiliation. When she returned, Cole was tending to his own horse, loosening the saddle and checking the animal's legs with careful, practiced movements. Thomas had gone inside, following his father. Sarah approached Cole hesitantly. "I am sorry about that," she said quietly. "Thomas is just tired and in pain." Cole glanced up at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her think he did not believe her excuse. "No need to apologize, ma'am," he said, but his tone was gentle, not dismissive. "You have been working all day too, from what I can see, making sure everyone had what they needed." "It is nothing," Sarah said, surprised that he had noticed. "It is just what I do." "It is not nothing," Cole said firmly. He finished with his horse and straightened, pulling off his gloves with a wince. His hands were raw and blistered, worse than Thomas's had been. "Taking care of people is never nothing." Sarah found herself blinking back unexpected tears. She could not remember the last time someone had acknowledged her work as valuable, as more than just expected duty. "Please," she said, gesturing toward the porch where she had set out the water and clean cloths. "Let me at least clean those burns properly. It will only take a moment." Cole hesitated, then nodded. "If you are sure, I do not want to make trouble for you." They sat on the porch steps, and Sarah carefully unwrapped the dirty cloths from his hands. The burns were indeed serious, angry red blisters covering his palms and fingers. She worked as gently as she could, cleaning away the dirt and ash, then applying a salve her mother had taught her to make from herbs and lard. Cole did not flinch or complain, though she knew it must hurt terribly. "You have done this before," Cole observed, watching her work. "My father was a ranch hand," Sarah said. "He was always getting hurt. Rope burns, cuts, bruises. My mother taught me how to tend wounds." She finished wrapping his hands in clean bandages and sat back. "There, that should help them heal faster." "Thank you," Cole said. He flexed his fingers carefully, testing the bandages. "That feels much better already." They sat in silence for a moment, and Sarah became aware of how close they were sitting, their shoulders almost touching. She should get up, should go inside and tend to Thomas as he expected, but she found she did not want to move. There was something peaceful about sitting here with this stranger, something that felt safe in a way nothing had felt safe in months. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said quietly, his eyes on the darkening prairie rather than on her. "And you do not have to answer if you do not want to." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "What? Are you all right?" He turned to look at her then, and his eyes were dark and serious in the fading light. "Living here, I mean." "With them? Are you all right?" No one had ever asked her that question. No one had ever looked past the surface of her life to see the truth beneath. Sarah opened her mouth to give the automatic lie, to say of course she was fine, everything was fine. But looking into Cole Brennan's eyes, seeing the genuine concern there, she found she could not force out the words. "No," she whispered, "I am not all right." Cole's jaw tightened, but he did not look away from her. "I figured as much," he said. "A man who grabs a woman the way he grabbed you this morning, that is not a man who treats her right in private either." Sarah felt her face flush hot. "You saw that?" "I saw enough," Cole said. He was quiet for a moment, then added carefully, "I know it is not my business, ma'am. I am just a stranger passing through, but I have seen what men like that can do, and I have seen where it leads. If you ever need help, Sarah," Thomas's voice bellowed from inside the house. "Where the hell are you?" Sarah jumped to her feet as if she had been burned. "I have to go," she said quickly. "Thank you for helping with the fire, and for," she gestured helplessly, unable to find words for what he had given her with his simple question and his honest concern. "Sarah," Thomas called again, his voice closer now. Cole stood as well, his bandaged hands hanging at his sides. "I am going to be staying on at Peterson's for a while," he said quietly. "If you need anything, anything at all, you can find me there. You understand?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Then she hurried inside before Thomas could come looking for her and find her alone with Cole on the darkening porch. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and tension. Thomas had injured his hands badly enough in the fire that he could not do much around the ranch, which meant he spent most of his time drinking and finding fault with everything Sarah did. She learned to move even more quietly, to make herself even more invisible, but it was never enough. He would grab her with his bandaged hands, apparently forgetting his injuries in his anger, and shake her for imagined slights. He would back her into corners and put his face close to hers, his breath sour with whiskey, and tell her all the ways she disappointed him. All the ways she needed to improve if she wanted to be worthy of the Mitchell name. And yet, through it all, Sarah found herself thinking about Cole Brennan. She thought about the way he had looked at her, with respect rather than ownership. She thought about his question, "Are you all right?" and the way he had actually listened to her answer. She thought about his offer of help and wondered if he had meant it, or if it had just been empty words spoken in a moment of sympathy. She did not have to wonder long. On a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the fire, Sarah was hanging laundry in the yard when she saw a rider approaching. Her heart leaped when she recognized Cole on his paint horse. He rode straight up to where she stood and dismounted, his hat in his hands. "Ma'am," he said politely, "I was hoping I might speak with Mr. Mitchell. Is he available?" Before Sarah could answer, John Mitchell emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You are that fellow who helped with the fire," John said, his tone neither friendly nor unfriendly. Brennan, right? Yes, sir, Cole said. I wanted to thank you for the meal you provided that night. Your future daughter-in-law is an excellent cook. She has her uses, John said dismissively. What brings you out here? I was hoping you might have work available, Cole said. I have been at Peterson's, but he is fully staffed for the season. I heard you lost some cattle in the fire and thought you might need an extra hand. Sarah's breath caught. Was this a coincidence, or had Cole engineered this as an excuse to stay nearby? She bent over the laundry basket, pretending to focus on the wet clothes, but every fiber of her being was attuned to the conversation happening behind her. We could use help, John admitted. Lost 4 head in the fire, and 2 of my regular hands are talking about moving on. Can you handle cattle? I can handle just about anything that needs doing on a ranch, Cole said. Grew up working my family's place in Texas, been working spreads in Nebraska and Kansas for the past 5 years. John considered this. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You would bunk with the other hands. Work is dawn to dusk, 7 days a week during busy season. You have a problem with that? No, sir, Cole said. Sounds fair. All right then, John said. You can start tomorrow, be here at dawn. Thank you, sir, Cole said. I appreciate the opportunity. As John walked back toward the barn, Cole turned to Sarah. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Sarah saw something there that made her pulse race. Then Cole mounted his horse and rode away, and Sarah was left standing in the yard with her heart pounding and a strange mixture of hope and terror flooding through her. That evening at dinner, John informed Thomas that he had hired Cole Brennan as a new ranch hand. Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. You hired that drifter, he demanded. Why? Because we need the help, John said calmly. He has experience and he is willing to work hard. I do not see the problem. The problem is I do not trust him, Thomas said. He glanced at Sarah with narrowed eyes. I saw how he looked at her, at my woman. Do not be ridiculous, John said, though there was a warning edge to his voice. If you are worried about Sarah straying, then maybe you should marry her already instead of dragging your feet. A ring on her finger would make it clear who she belongs to. Sarah's stomach turned. The wedding had been postponed twice, first because of her father's death and then because Thomas said they needed to save more money. Sarah had been grateful for the delays, though she could not have said why. Now she realized it was because some part of her had been hoping for an escape, even though she could not imagine what form that escape might take. Maybe you are right, Thomas said slowly, still watching Sarah. Maybe it is time we made it official. That night, after the dishes were washed and the house was quiet, Thomas came to Sarah's room. She was sitting on her bed in her nightgown, brushing her hair, when he walked in without knocking. He had been drinking again, she could tell from the way he moved, careful and deliberate as if the floor might shift beneath him. We are going to be married next month, he announced. I will talk to the preacher tomorrow and arrange everything. Sarah's brush stilled in her hand. Next month. She repeated faintly. Is there a problem? Thomas asked, his voice dangerously quiet. No, Sarah said quickly. No problem, I am just surprised, that is all. Thomas crossed the room and took the brush from her hand. For a moment, Sarah thought he might hit her with it, but instead, he set it on the dresser and tilted her chin up to look at him. You will be a good wife, he said. It was not a question. You will obey me and honor me and never give me reason to doubt you. Do you understand? Yes, Sarah whispered. Because if you do not, Thomas continued, his thumb pressing against her jaw hard enough to hurt, I will make sure you regret it. I am not a cruel man, Sarah, but I will not be disrespected in my own home. I love you, and sometimes love requires discipline. You understand that, right? Everything I do is because I love you. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then released her and left the room. Sarah sat motionless on her bed, listening to his heavy footsteps fade down the hall. Then she lay down and stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine what her life would be like as Thomas Mitchell's wife, legally bound to him with no possibility of escape. The thought filled her with such profound despair that she had to press her hand against her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. Cole Brennan started work at the Mitchell Ranch the next morning. Sarah saw him from the kitchen window as she prepared breakfast, riding up just as the sun was breaking over the horizon. He dismounted in the yard and was immediately greeted by John Mitchell, who pointed toward the barn and began explaining the day's work. Cole listened intently, nodding, asking occasional questions. Sarah watched him and felt that strange flutter in her chest again, that sense of possibility she could not quite name. Over the following days, Sarah found her eyes drawn to Cole constantly. She would watch him from the kitchen window as he worked with the horses or repaired fencing. She would see him at meals, sitting with the other ranch hands at the long table in the bunkhouse while she served food. He was always polite to her, always respectful, but there was something in the way he looked at her when Thomas was not watching that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in longer than she could remember. Thomas noticed. Of course, Thomas noticed. He had always been watchful, always looking for evidence of disloyalty or disrespect. One evening, as Sarah was clearing away the dinner dishes, Thomas grabbed her wrist and pulled her close. "I see you watching him," he hissed into her ear. "That cowboy, do not think I do not notice." "I am not watching anyone," Sarah protested. "I am just doing my work." "You are a liar," Thomas said. He twisted her wrist until she gasped in pain. "But it does not matter. Next month you will be my wife, legally mine, and if you so much as look at another man after that, I will beat you bloody." "Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Sarah said through gritted teeth. Thomas released her wrist and pushed her away. "Good. Now finish the dishes and get to bed. I do not want to see your face for the rest of the night." Sarah finished her work with shaking hands, then retreated to her room. She lay in bed, her wrist throbbing, and tried to imagine any possible future that did not involve becoming Thomas Mitchell's wife. But she had no money, no family, nowhere to go. She was trapped as surely as if she were already wearing his ring. The next morning, Sarah was drawing water from the pump behind the house when Cole appeared around the corner of the barn. He was alone, which was unusual. Sarah glanced around nervously, looking for Thomas or John, but the yard was empty. "Morning, ma'am," Cole said quietly. He walked over to the pump and filled his own bucket, working in silence for a moment. Then, without looking at her directly, he said in a voice so low she almost could not hear him, "I heard Thomas talking to his father last night about the wedding." Sarah's hands tightened on the handle of her bucket. "It is not your concern," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Cole agreed, "but that does not mean I am not concerned." He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "You do not have to marry him, you know. You could leave." "Leave," Sarah repeated with a bitter laugh. "And go where? Do what? I have no money and no prospects, no family. Where exactly would I go?" "Anywhere," Cole said. "Anywhere has to be better than here, being married to a man who hurts you." Sarah glanced around again, terrified that someone would overhear this conversation. "You do not understand," she said desperately. "It is not that simple. I cannot just leave." "Why not?" Cole pressed. "What is stopping you?" "Everything." Sarah said, her voice rising despite her efforts to keep it low. "Everything is stopping me. Fear, shame, practicality, lack of options, all of it." Cole set down his bucket and took a step closer to her. "What if you had options?" he said quietly. "What if you had a way out?" Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" But before Cole could answer, Thomas's voice cut through the morning air like a knife. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" Sarah spun around to find Thomas striding across the yard, his face dark with anger. "I am getting water," she said quickly. "I do not care what excuse you have," Thomas snapped. He reached her in 3 long strides and grabbed her arm, yanking her away from Cole. "I told you to stay away from him." "She was just getting water," Cole said, his voice calm but his body tense. "I was doing the same. We were not doing anything wrong." "I did not ask for your input," Thomas snarled at him. "You keep your eyes and your words to yourself, cowboy, or you will find yourself out of a job real fast." Thomas, please, Sarah said, trying to pull her arm free. We were not doing anything, I swear. But Thomas was not listening. He dragged her across the yard toward the house, his grip on her arm painful and bruising. Sarah could feel Cole watching them, could sense him taking a step forward as if to intervene, but what could he do? Thomas was the boss's son. Cole was just a hired hand. If he interfered, he would be fired or worse. Thomas hauled Sarah into the house and slammed the door behind them. Then he shoved her against the wall, his forearm across her throat, applying just enough pressure to make it hard to breathe. I have tried to be patient with you, he said, his face inches from hers. I have tried to teach you how to be a proper wife, but you keep testing me. You keep pushing to see how far you can go. He pressed harder against her throat, and Sarah's vision began to gray at the edges. Maybe I need to teach you a harder lesson. Maybe I need to show you what happens to women who disrespect their men. Sarah clawed at his arm, unable to speak, unable to breathe. For a terrible moment, she thought he was actually going to kill her. Then, abruptly, he released her and stepped back. Sarah collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, her throat burning. Get up, Thomas said coldly. Clean yourself up and get breakfast started, and if I catch you anywhere near that cowboy again, I will make sure you regret it. Do you understand me? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Thomas stared down at her for a moment longer, then turned and walked out of the house, leaving her crumpled on the floor. Sarah stayed there for several minutes, trying to catch her breath, trying to stop shaking. And for the first time, she allowed herself to think the thought she had been avoiding for months. If I do not leave, he is going to kill me eventually. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but someday. This will not stop. It will only get worse. She pulled herself to her feet and looked at her reflection in the hall mirror. Her throat was already beginning to bruise, dark marks in the shape of Thomas's arm. There would be no hiding this. Everyone would see what he had done to her. And no one would do anything about it, because she was his property or nearly so, and what a man did to his own property was his business, unless she left. Unless she found the courage to walk away from this life, this prison, and take her chances on the unknown. The thought terrified her. But staying terrified her more. That evening, as Sarah served supper, she kept her eyes downcast and her movements careful. The bruises on her throat were visible above the collar of her dress, and she could feel everyone's eyes on them. John Mitchell said nothing, just ate his meal in silence. Thomas sat across from her, watching her with a satisfied smirk that made her stomach turn. He had marked her, claimed her in the most brutal way possible, and he was pleased with himself for it. After dinner, Sarah was in the kitchen washing dishes when she heard a soft knock at the back door. She froze, her hands in the dishwater. The knock came again, quiet but insistent. Sarah dried her hands and went to the door, opening it just a crack. Cole Brennan stood in the darkness outside, his hat in his hands. "I am sorry to disturb you," he said quietly. "But I needed to make sure you were all right. I saw him drag you inside, and then later I saw—" His eyes went to her throat and his jaw clenched. "I saw the bruises. You should not be here," Sarah whispered urgently. "If Thomas sees you—" "I do not care if Thomas sees me," Cole said, though he kept his voice low. "I care that you are being hurt. Sarah, please, you have to get away from here, from him." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made something inside her chest tighten. "I cannot," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Yes, you can," Cole insisted. "I know you are scared, I know it seems impossible. But I can help you. I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to get you somewhere safe, somewhere you can start over." Sarah stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." Cole was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I know what it is like to feel trapped," he said. "My father was like Thomas. He used his fists to keep my mother in line, called it love and discipline. I watched her suffer for years before she finally found the courage to leave. I was 15 when she packed our things and walked away in the middle of the night, took me with her. It was the hardest thing she ever did, but it saved her life. Saved mine too. He looked at Sarah with fierce intensity. I see that same trapped look in your eyes that I saw in my mother's, and I will be damned if I stand by and watch another woman suffer the way she did, not if there is anything I can do to help. Tears were running down Sarah's face now, silent and unstoppable. I am so afraid, she whispered. I know, Cole said gently. But you are stronger than you think, stronger than he has made you believe. And you do not have to do this alone. I will help you, Sarah. If you trust me, I will help you get away from here. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and compassion. This man, this stranger who had ridden into her life just weeks ago, was offering her the one thing she had thought was impossible: hope, the possibility of freedom, the chance at a different life. How, she asked, how would we do it? Cole glanced around to make sure they were still alone, then spoke quickly and quietly. There is a train from Abilene to Denver that leaves at dawn every Wednesday. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Tomorrow night, after everyone is asleep, you pack whatever you can carry and meet me at the fork in the road, the one I passed the first day I saw you. I will have horses ready. We ride to Abilene, you get on that train, and by the time Thomas wakes up, you will be halfway to Colorado. What about you? Sarah asked. Will not John and Thomas know you helped me? Will not they come after you? I can take care of myself, Cole said. I have been a drifter most of my adult life. I am used to moving on. But you need to get somewhere far away from here, somewhere they cannot find you. Denver is big enough that you can disappear. And I have a cousin there who runs a boarding house. She will help you get settled, find work. You will be safe. Sarah's mind was racing. Could she really do this? Could she really run away in the middle of the night, abandoning everything she had ever known? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. What if they catch us? She whispered. What if Thomas comes after us before we reach Abilene? Then we deal with that if it happens, Cole said firmly. But Sarah, listen to me. If you stay here, if you marry him, what kind of life are you going to have? How long before he does not stop at choking you? How long before he takes it too far and you end up dead? Sarah knew he was right. She had been trying not to think about it, but she knew. The violence was escalating. Thomas's rage was growing. If she stayed, it was only a matter of time before he seriously injured or killed her, and once she was his wife, there would be no escape at all. She would be legally his property, and the law would not intervene in a domestic matter between husband and wife. All right, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. All right, I will do it, tomorrow night. Cole's face broke into a smile, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. You are doing the right thing, he said. I promise you, Sarah, you are going to be all right. I hope so, Sarah said. Then impulsively she reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you for caring, for helping. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You do not owe me anything, Cole said, squeezing her hand back. Just promise me you will be ready tomorrow night, and Sarah, do not tell anyone, not a soul. Can you do that? I can, Sarah promised. Cole nodded and slipped back into the darkness, disappearing as silently as he had come. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She was really going to do this. She was going to leave. Tomorrow night she would be free. The next day passed in a strange blur of normalcy and unreality. Sarah went through her usual routines, cooking, cleaning, serving meals, but her mind was elsewhere, planning and preparing. She could not take much with her, just what would fit in a small bag that she could carry on horseback. She had almost no money of her own, just a few dollars she had managed to save from selling eggs. It would have to be enough. Thomas was in a good mood that day, which made everything both easier and harder. He did not grab her or threaten her, but he did talk enthusiastically about their upcoming wedding, describing the life they would have together. Sarah smiled and nodded and hated herself for the deception, but she reminded herself that she was only deceiving him in order to survive. This was not a betrayal. This was self-preservation. That night, Sarah barely touched her dinner. Her stomach was too knotted with nerves to eat. After the dishes were done and the house was quiet, she retreated to her room and waited. She had already packed her small bag and hidden it under her bed. Now she just had to wait for everyone to fall asleep. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah sat on her bed, fully dressed, listening to the sounds of the house settling. She heard John go to his room around 9 o'clock. Thomas came upstairs around 10, his footsteps heavy and uneven from drinking. She heard him pause outside her door and her heart nearly stopped, but then he continued on to his own room. Sarah waited another 2 hours just to be safe, before finally allowing herself to move. She pulled the bag from under her bed and crept to the door. The hallway was dark and silent. She moved as quietly as she could, barely breathing, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. Down the stairs, one careful step at a time, through the front hall. Her hand on the doorknob. "Where do you think you are going?" Sarah's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly to find Thomas standing at the top of the stairs, a lamp in his hand. His face was in shadow, but she could hear the rage in his voice. "I was just—" Sarah started, but there was no good lie, no reasonable explanation for why she would be leaving the house in the middle of the night with a packed bag. "You were just what?" Thomas descended the stairs slowly, deliberately. "You were just running away." "With that cowboy, I am guessing. Did you really think I would not notice? Did you think I was too stupid to see what was happening?" "Thomas, please," Sarah said, backing toward the door. "I cannot marry you. I cannot stay here. You hurt me." "You hurt me all the time and you call it love, but it is not love. Love is not supposed to hurt." "Everything I have done has been for your own good," Thomas snarled. "To make you better, to make you worthy of being my wife, and this is how you repay me. By sneaking off in the night like a thief." He reached the bottom of the stairs and set the lamp on the hall table. Then he started toward her, and Sarah saw in his eyes that he was going to hurt her worse than he ever had before. She fumbled for the doorknob behind her, wrenched the door open, and ran. She heard Thomas bellowing behind her, heard his heavy footsteps on the porch. She ran across the yard toward the barn, her bag clutched in her hand, her breath coming in panicked gasps. If she could just reach the horses, if she could just get a head start. Thomas caught her before she reached the barn. He grabbed her from behind and threw her to the ground. Sarah hit the hard-packed earth with enough force to knock the wind from her lungs. Thomas was on top of her in an instant, his hands around her throat. "You are mine," he hissed, squeezing. "You will always be mine. I will kill you before I let you leave me." Sarah clawed at his hands, trying to pry them away, but he was too strong. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. This was it. This was how she was going to die. She had waited too long, had hoped for too much, and now she was going to die in the dirt of the Mitchell ranch for daring to want freedom. Then, suddenly, Thomas's weight was gone. Sarah gasped for air, coughing and choking as she heard the sounds of a struggle nearby. She rolled onto her side and saw Cole Brennan grappling with Thomas, the two men locked in combat. They were evenly matched in size, but Thomas was drunk and enraged, while Cole was sober and focused. Cole landed a solid punch to Thomas's jaw that sent him reeling backward. "Get to the horses," Cole shouted at Sarah. "Go." Sarah scrambled to her feet, grabbed her bag, and ran for the barn. Behind her, she could hear the fight continuing, hear the meaty sounds of fists on flesh and Thomas's roars of fury. She found Cole's paint horse already saddled and waiting, along with a second mount. Cole had been prepared, had been watching and waiting for her. With shaking hands, Sarah pulled herself into the saddle. Cole appeared a moment later, running toward the barn. His lip was split and bleeding, and there was a rapidly darkening bruise on his cheekbone, but he was grinning. "Come on," he said, swinging into his own saddle, "before he recovers." They galloped out of the barn just as Thomas was pulling himself to his feet. "I will find you," he screamed after them. "You hear me, Sarah? I will find you, and when I do, I will make you sorry you were ever born." But his threats were soon lost in the thunder of hoofbeats as Sarah and Cole rode hard into the darkness. Sarah did not look back. She kept her eyes forward on the road ahead, on the promise of freedom and a new life. The night air whipped past her face. cool and clean, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah felt like she could breathe. They rode through the night, pushing the horses hard. Cole knew the trails well, and he led them on back roads and cattle paths where they were less likely to be followed. By the time the sun began to rise, they were on the outskirts of Abilene, and Sarah could see the train station in the distance. They stopped in a small grove of trees to rest the horses and catch their breath. Sarah slid down from her mount on shaking legs, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and leftover fear. Cole dismounted beside her and caught her as her knees buckled. "Easy," he said gently, supporting her weight. "You are all right. You are safe now." Sarah looked up at him, at this man who had risked everything to help her, and felt something shift in her chest. It was not gratitude, though she was grateful. It was not relief, though she was relieved. It was something deeper, something that made her aware of how close they were standing, how warm his hands were on her arms, how dark and kind his eyes were in the early morning light. "Why did you do this?" she whispered. "Really, you could have been killed. Thomas could have shot you." Cole was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. "I told you," he said finally, "I could not stand by and watch you suffer." "But there has to be more to it than that," Sarah pressed. "You do not even know me." "Maybe I want to know you," Cole said softly. "Maybe from the first moment I saw you, with that bruise on your face and that sadness in your eyes, I wanted to know who you were beneath all that pain. Maybe I wanted to see you smile. Maybe I wanted—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "This is not the time or place for this conversation. You have a train to catch." But Sarah did not move. She stayed where she was, looking up at him, and suddenly she knew. She knew what he had been about to say because she felt it too. This strange, impossible connection between them. This sense that somehow, in the midst of all this chaos and fear, she had found something precious. "Maybe I do not want to get on that train alone," she said quietly. Cole's eyes widened. "Sarah, maybe I want you to come with me," she continued, the words coming faster now, urgent and reckless. "Maybe I do not want to go to Denver by myself and stay with your cousin and try to build a new life without you. Maybe I want you there. Maybe I need you there." "You do not know what you are saying," Cole said, though his hands tightened on her arms as if he could not bear to let her go. "You have been through something traumatic. You are not thinking clearly." "I am thinking more clearly than I have in months," Sarah said. "Cole, you showed me what real kindness looks like, what real gentleness feels like. You risked your life to save mine. How am I supposed to just walk away from that? How am I supposed to walk away from you? Because you deserve a chance to find out who you are without any man in your life," Cole said, though his voice was strained. "You have been under Thomas's control for so long. You need time to heal, to discover yourself. You do not need me or anyone else." "What if I want you anyway?" Sarah asked. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle on the bruise Thomas had left there. "What if I am not ready to say goodbye?" Cole closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "Sarah," he breathed, "if I come with you, it is not going to be like it was with Thomas. I will not own you or control you. I will not hurt you or force you to be something you are not. If I come with you, it is as your friend. As someone who cares about you. Nothing more, not unless someday you decide that is what you want. And even then, it would be your choice. Always your choice. Do you understand?" Tears were streaming down Sarah's face again, but this time they were not tears of fear or pain. They were tears of something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I understand," she whispered. "And yes, I want you to come with me, please." Cole opened his eyes and looked at her, and Sarah saw her own feelings reflected there, this strange, fragile, precious thing growing between them. This possibility of something beautiful. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Then I am coming with you," he said. "To Denver and beyond, if that is where you want to go. I am with you, Sarah, for as long as you want me." They boarded the train to Denver as the sun was rising fully over the Kansas prairie. Sarah sat by the window, watching the landscape roll past, watching the Mitchell Ranch and everything it represented disappear into the distance. Cole sat beside her close enough that their shoulders touched, a solid and reassuring presence. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. Sarah considered the question. She was thinking about so many things, about her father and her mother, both gone now. About the girl she had been before Thomas, full of dreams and hope. About the woman she had become under his control, small and frightened and convinced she deserved the pain he inflicted. And about the woman she might become now, free and healing and surrounded by kindness instead of cruelty. "I am thinking about what comes next," she said finally. "I am thinking that I do not know what my life is going to look like now, but for the first time in a very long time, I am excited to find out." Cole smiled and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The gesture was simple and sweet, asking nothing, offering everything. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we will figure it out together." Sarah squeezed his hand and turned back to the window, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Somewhere behind them, Thomas Mitchell was probably already organizing a search party, already plotting how to find her and drag her back. But Sarah was not afraid anymore. She had made her choice. She had claimed her freedom. And she had found, in the most unexpected place, the first glimmers of what real love might feel like. Denver was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. Cole's cousin Margaret ran a respectable boarding house on the edge of town, and she welcomed Sarah with open arms and no questions asked. She gave Sarah a room of her own, clean and bright with lace curtains and a comfortable bed. It was the first space Sarah had ever had that was truly hers, and she spent the first night there crying with relief and exhaustion and gratitude. Cole took a room in the same boarding house, 2 doors down from Sarah's. True to his word, he made no demands on her, no assumptions about what their relationship was or would become. He simply existed in her orbit, steady and kind, helping Margaret with repairs around the house, finding work at a nearby stable, being there whenever Sarah needed him. In those first few weeks, Sarah began the slow, painful process of healing. She found work at a dress shop, where her skills with a needle earned her a modest wage. She walked the streets of Denver and marveled at her freedom, at the fact that she could go where she pleased without asking permission, could speak to whomever she wanted without fear of punishment. She began, slowly, to remember who she had been before Thomas. To rediscover parts of herself she had thought were lost forever, and through it all, Cole was there. Not hovering or controlling, but present. They would have breakfast together at Margaret's long table, surrounded by the other boarders. They would walk through the city on Sunday afternoons, talking about everything and nothing. He would tell her stories about his childhood in Texas, about his mother's courage in leaving his father, about the years he had spent drifting from ranch to ranch, never quite belonging anywhere. She would tell him about her parents, about growing up on the prairie, about her dreams of someday having a home and a family of her own. One evening, about 6 weeks after their arrival in Denver, Sarah and Cole were sitting on the front porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. It was a beautiful sight, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, and Sarah felt a peace she had not known was possible. "I got a letter today," Cole said quietly, "from a friend I know back in Kansas. He says Thomas Mitchell came looking for you in Abilene the day after we left, tore up the train station demanding to know if anyone had seen you, but no one told him anything." Sarah's heart clenched with residual fear. "Do you think he will keep looking?" "Maybe for a while," Cole admitted. "But Denver is a long way from Abilene and we covered our tracks well. I do not think he will find you, Sarah, and even if he did, he has no legal claim on you. You were not married. You have every right to leave." "I know," Sarah said, but knowing it logically and believing it emotionally were 2 different things. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you ever regret helping me? I have turned your whole life upside down." Cole turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "I do not regret a single moment," he said firmly. "Helping you was the best thing I have ever done. Being here with you is," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Just being near you, watching you heal and grow stronger, seeing you smile again, that has been more than I ever hoped for." Sarah felt her heart begin to race. They had been dancing around this for weeks, this growing connection between them. But neither of them had been brave enough to name it, to acknowledge what was happening. Now, looking into Cole's eyes, Sarah found the courage. "I love you," she said simply. "I did not mean to. I thought it was too soon, that I needed more time to heal before I could trust anyone again. But I love you, Cole Brennan. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you make me feel safe. I love that you have never once tried to control me or change me. I love that you saw me at my lowest and still thought I was worth saving." Cole's eyes were bright with emotion. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "I have loved you since the day I saw you standing in that yard with your bruises and your sadness and your incredible strength. I have been yours from that moment, whether you wanted me or not. And if you will have me, I would like to spend the rest of my life showing you what real love looks like. The kind of love that lifts you up instead of tearing you down. The kind of love that makes you more yourself, not less." Sarah reached out and took his hand. "I would like that very much," she whispered. Cole leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Sarah did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses Thomas had forced on her. This was tender and patient, a question rather than a demand. This was love. They were married 3 months later in a small church in Denver with Margaret and a handful of friends as witnesses. Sarah wore a dress of blue calico that she had made herself, the color bright and cheerful. Cole wore his Sunday best and looked at her as if she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and partnership, and every word felt true in a way Sarah's previous engagement never had. After the ceremony, they had a simple celebration at the boarding house, with cake and music and laughter. Sarah danced with her new husband and felt lighter than air. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. This was what it meant to be loved and cherished and respected. This was what she had been missing all along. Cole found work as the foreman on a ranch outside Denver, and they rented a small house on the property. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was theirs. Sarah filled it with curtains and quilts and flowers, making it a home. She found she had a talent for gardening, and soon they had vegetables growing in neat rows and flowers blooming in cheerful profusion around the doorstep. Life was not always easy. There were hard days when Sarah would wake from nightmares about Thomas, certain she heard his voice calling her name. There were moments when she flinched from sudden movements, when her body remembered the violence even though her mind knew she was safe. But Cole was patient with her, giving her space when she needed it, holding her when she wanted comfort. He never rushed her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. And slowly, over months and then years, Sarah healed. They built a life together that was full of small, perfect moments. Sunday mornings when they would sleep late and then make breakfast together, laughing as they burned the eggs. Summer evenings when they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the Rockies. Winter nights when they would curl up together by the fire and read aloud from books they borrowed from the lending library. These were the moments Sarah treasured, the simple, everyday joy of sharing her life with someone who loved her. 2 years after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to a son. They named him Daniel, after Sarah's father. He was a healthy baby with dark hair like his mother and his father's kind eyes. Sarah held him for the first time and wept with joy, marveling that she had helped create this perfect little person. Cole was a wonderful father, patient and playful, always ready to walk the floor with Daniel when he was fussy, or to change diapers without complaint. As Sarah watched Cole with their son, she thought about how far she had come from that terrified young woman who had stood in front of a mirror in the Mitchell Ranch house, wondering if love was supposed to leave marks. She had learned that real love did not hurt. Real love was patient and kind. Real love lifted you up and made you stronger. Real love was what she saw in Cole's eyes every time he looked at her. 3 years after Daniel was born, their daughter arrived. They named her Rose, and she was as bright and cheerful as her namesake flower. Sarah had worried during her pregnancy that she would not have enough love for a second child, that somehow adding another person to their family would diminish what she felt for Daniel. But the moment she held Rose, she understood that love did not divide, it multiplied. Her heart simply expanded to make room. Cole continued to work as a foreman, and he was good at it. The ranch owner appreciated his skill with horses and his honest, hard-working nature. Within 5 years, Cole had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land of his own. It was not much, just 40 acres on the outskirts of Denver, but it was enough for a few head of cattle and a garden and room for the children to run and play. They built a house together on that land, a real house with 4 bedrooms and a proper kitchen and a front porch big enough for the whole family to sit on summer evenings. Sarah planted flowers and vegetables, and Cole built a barn for the animals. It was everything Sarah had ever dreamed of, a home that was truly hers, filled with love and laughter and safety. As the years passed, Sarah found herself thinking less and less about Thomas Mitchell and the time she had spent under his control. It felt like a different lifetime, something that had happened to a different person. She was Sarah Brennan now, wife and mother, gardener and homemaker. She was strong and confident and happy. The scars were still there, both physical and emotional, but they no longer defined her. They were simply part of her story, part of what had brought her to this place, this life, this love. When Daniel was 10 and Rose was 7, Sarah received a letter that made her hands shake. It was from Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper's wife from Abilene. Sarah almost did not open it, afraid of what news it might contain. But Cole encouraged her gently, and so she broke the seal and read. The letter was brief. Mrs. Henderson wrote to tell Sarah that Thomas Mitchell had died 6 months ago, thrown from a horse while drunk. He had broken his neck in the fall and died instantly. John Mitchell had passed away a year before that from a heart ailment. The Mitchell ranch had been sold to pay debts. I thought you would want to know, Mrs. Henderson wrote, that you are truly free now. There is no one left who might come looking for you. I hope you have found happiness wherever you are. Sarah read the letter twice, then set it down and stared out the window at her garden, at her children playing in the yard, at Cole repairing a fence in the distance. She waited to feel something, relief, vindication, sorrow. But all she felt was a kind of distant pity for the man Thomas had been, so consumed by his need to control and dominate that he had destroyed himself. And then she folded the letter carefully, put it in a drawer, and went outside to join her family. That evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah told Cole about the letter. He listened quietly, holding her hand, and when she was finished, he asked, "How do you feel?" Sarah thought about it. "Free," she said finally. "I have been free for years, but now I feel it completely. There is no shadow hanging over me anymore, no fear that someday he might appear and try to take me back. It is over. Really, truly over." Cole pulled her close, and Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "You were always free," he murmured into her hair. "From the moment you chose to leave, you were free. He just did not know it." Sarah smiled. He was right, of course. Freedom was not something someone else could give her or take away. It was something she had claimed for herself that night she ran away from the Mitchell ranch. Everything that had come after, the life she had built, the love she had found, the happiness she felt, had all grown from that single act of courage. Years continued to pass, filled with the joys and challenges of raising children and running a small ranch. Daniel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved working with the horses. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and dreaming big dreams. Sarah and Cole grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their disagreements, of course, but they learned to talk through them, to listen to each other, to compromise and forgive. They learned that real love was not the absence of conflict, but the commitment to work through it together. When Sarah was 45, she became a grandmother for the first time. Daniel had married a sweet young woman named Emma, and they had a baby girl they named Sarah, after her grandmother. Sarah held her tiny namesake and felt the circle of her life complete itself. This baby would grow up knowing only love and safety. She would never know the fear and violence that had marked Sarah's early years. That legacy ended here, with Sarah and Cole and the life they had built together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Cole and Sarah took a trip back to Kansas. Not to Abilene, but to visit the prairie where Sarah had grown up. They stood together in the tall grass, watching the wind ripple across the endless expanse, and Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. This place had shaped her, both the beauty of it and the pain, but it no longer held power over her. She had taken the best of what it offered, the strength, the resilience, the ability to endure, and left the rest behind. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if we had never met?" Cole asked, his arm around her waist. Sarah leaned into him, solid and warm and constant after all these years. "I try not to," she said honestly. "That life is too painful to imagine. I think I would have died either physically or in spirit. You saved me, Cole. You showed me what real tenderness felt like." "You saved yourself," Cole corrected gently. "I just gave you a hand up. You did the hard work of healing, of choosing to trust again, of building a life worth living. That was all you." Sarah turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. After 20 years, she still loved him with a fierceness that sometimes surprised her. "We saved each other," she said, "and I would not change a single moment of our life together." Cole smiled and kissed her, and Sarah closed her eyes and let herself sink into the feeling. This was love. Real, lasting, beautiful love. The kind that grew stronger with time instead of fading. The kind that healed instead of hurt. The kind that made everything worthwhile. They returned to Denver and to their family, and life continued in its beautiful, ordinary way. Sarah tended her garden and watched her grandchildren grow. Cole worked the ranch until age slowed him down, and then he spent his days teaching Daniel everything he knew. They sat together on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands like young lovers even though their hair was gray and their faces lined with age. When Sarah was 63, she woke one morning and realized she was completely, perfectly happy. Not happy in spite of her past, but happy because of all of it. The pain that had taught her strength, the fear that had taught her courage, the darkness that had taught her to appreciate the light. She was happy because she had found Cole, because they had built this life together, because she had learned that love was not about possession or control, but about freedom and choice and mutual respect. She turned to look at Cole, still asleep beside her after all these years, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This man had shown her what real love looked like, had given her the space to heal and grow, had stood beside her through every joy and every sorrow. He had loved her patiently and steadily without demanding anything in return. He had been her partner, her friend, her safe harbor in every storm. Cole's eyes opened, and he smiled when he saw her watching him. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Sarah said, leaning over to kiss him. "I love you. I love you too," Cole said, pulling her close. "Every day for the rest of my life," and that was exactly what they did. They loved each other every day for the rest of their lives. Through good times and hard times, through health and illness, through all the seasons of their years together. They watched their children and grandchildren thrive, passing on the legacy of true, healthy love. They grew old together, their bodies aging but their connection only deepening. When Sarah died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, Cole was holding her hand, just as he had been holding it for over 30 years of marriage. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, a family built on love and respect and kindness. As Sarah took her last breath, she was not afraid. She had lived a full, beautiful life. She had known real love. She had been free. And that, she thought as she drifted away, was all anyone could ask for, to be loved well, to be free. To know beyond any doubt that you mattered, that you were enough, that you were cherished exactly as you were. Cole lived 3 more years after Sarah passed, and he spent those years sharing stories about her with anyone who would listen. He told their grandchildren about the brave young woman who had chosen freedom over safety, who had trusted a stranger with her life, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. He told them that real love was not about grand gestures or passionate drama, but about daily kindness, steady support, and choosing each other over and over again. When Cole finally joined Sarah, it was in the house they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, in the life they had made with their own hands. And if there was anything beyond this life, then surely they found each other there too, still holding hands, still smiling, still grateful for the unexpected gift they had given each other all those years ago on a Kansas prairie under an endless sky. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the lessons they had taught about what real love looked like, in the example they had set of patience and kindness and unwavering commitment. They had shown their family that love did not hurt, that tenderness was strength, and that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. The ranch they had built remained in the family for generations, a testament to what 2 people could create when they worked together in love and trust. And sometimes, on summer evenings, when the sun was setting over the Rockies and the air was soft and warm, people swore they could feel the presence of Sarah and Cole still lingering there, still watching over the home they had made, still loving each other across the boundaries of time and death. Because some loves are too strong to end, even when life does. Some loves become part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of a place and a family and a story that gets passed down through the years. Sarah and Cole's love was that kind of love, the kind that transforms darkness into light, that turns pain into healing, that proves beyond any doubt that kindness is stronger than cruelty, that freedom is worth fighting for, and that real love, true love, the kind of love that matters, is the kind that makes you more yourself, not less. And they lived happily ever after in this life and whatever came beyond, 2 souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk together toward the light.